Welcome back. Daughter's given me a bit of a homemade lockdown haircut here. Quite liking this. So this week's Happy Families series reading video is going to be ta-da, Mr Biff the Boxer. Mr Biff the Boxer. With some kind of trophy. Can we infer from that maybe a competition, perhaps, of some sort? And a very exhausted looking man with his arms hanging down as he runs. And is that his son on a bicycle? And Janet is the illustrator this time with Alan Allberg. So they were husband and wife, and they wrote the original Happy Families books years and years ago before Janet Allberg died. And that was right back in 1980. This was first published. So this is one of the earliest Happy Families books. On the back cover, Mr Biff and Mr Bop are boxers and famous rivals too. Rivals is kind of like sporting people who are always having a competition with each other. Or you might not just be sport, it might be that you and someone else who's really whizzy in times table rock stars always get the top two, and you're always trying to beat each other. You're rivals. So you're trying to beat each other. Mr Bop is fit and lean. Lean means kind of slim and strong. And Mr Biff, well, Mr Biff likes a cream cake or two. Will he ever be able to toughen up in time for the big charity match? Charity match. So that sounds like we were right being detectives about the trophy. There is some kind of competition or match. And then I like this quote at the bottom. The Allbergs belong with A. Milne. You know what he wrote? Yep, Winnie the Pooh. And Lewis Carroll. You know what he wrote? Alice in Wonderland. To the greatest tradition of children's books, says the Sunday Times. That's a famous newspaper. Lewis Carroll, I really disagree. I don't like Alice in Wonderland at all. Ugh. And here we go. There was once a man named Mr Bop. Mr Bop was a boxer. Here we are. This must be Mr Bop, presumably. He was as fit as a fiddle. Oh, look, nice little simile with as fit as a fiddle. I have no idea why people say that. A fiddle? Are we talking about a violin? I might have to look up the origins of that. Fit as a fiddle. He was the toughest man in the town. He was the champion. There was another boxer in the town. His name was Mr Biff. Okay, looking significantly less fit here. Eating his chocolates, lying there, reading with his feet up. Not that reading has to go against being sporty, you understand. I've just been searching up about as fit as a fiddle, that funny simile. This website reckons it's to do with how much work it takes to maintain a violin, a fiddle, in good condition. So it says it may have something to do with the maintenance involved in keeping a musical instrument in good condition. Okay, I can testify to that. My daughter plays the violin, and it takes a lot of effort to keep it in good condition. This website has got a completely different perspective. This says, of course, the fiddle here is the colloquial name for a violin. Fit didn't originally mean healthy and energetic, in the sense it's often used nowadays to describe the inhabitants of gyms. When this phrase was coined, fit was used to mean suitable and seemly, in the way we might say now, fit for purpose. So way back in 1603, so that is hundreds of years ago. Quick bit of maths, how many 100 years? So that's 417 years ago, when Queen Elizabeth was just the end of the Tudor time. She was just coming off the throne and James I was starting. It says, there comes down Mistress Nurse as fine as a farthing fiddle in her petticoats and kirtle. So that was basically saying she was very suitable for whatever it was she was doing. Back to Mr Biff. Mr Biff was not as fit as a fiddle. He ate too many cream cakes. He drank too many bottles of beer. Mr Biff was not tough. He liked to sit in an easy chair by a cosy fire. Mr Biff's cosy fire, there you can see little warm coals glowing, and his fireplace. Look at that scene of domestic relaxation. Is that you in lockdown? With boxing gloves on, playing chess, playing the piano, feet up on is that dumbbells? I'm sure we've all got our good intentions of keeping very fit, and maybe this is more like some of our homes at the moment than we might like to admit. He liked to put his slippers on and read the paper. He slept in a feather bed. Oh, look, I think that eclair is the one I'm going to go for. Yum. One day, posters appeared in the town. They said, "Big charity fight, Mr Biff against Mr Bop." Okay, that's news. If you've ever had that feeling where you suddenly discover that you're meant to be doing something that you didn't realise, poor old Mr Biff and presumably Mr Bop as well, it's completely news to them and suddenly it's up on the wall. Oh dear! No wonder Mr Biff's wife is saying, "Oh dear." Mr Biff told his wife about the fight. "It's for charity," he said. You know, as in the money won't go to profits, it'll go to making a good cause. "Me against Mr Bop." "Oh dear," said Mrs Biff. "They say he's the toughest man in the town. They say his wife is the toughest woman too," said Mr Biff. They say sounds like rumour and gossip and hearsay. So Mr and Mrs Biff don't actually know Mr Bop. They're just repeating what people say about them. Mrs Biff told the children about the fight. "It's for charity," she said. "Your dad against Mr Bop." "Our dad'll win," said Billy Biff. "He will biff him," Betty Biff said. This is where we kind of start sounding like a tongue twister. "Our dad will win. You wait and see." "But your dad is not fit," said Mrs Biff. "And he is not tough." "We'll be his trainers then," said Billy Biff. "And toughen him up," Betty Biff said. "You wait and see." I love that. "We'll be his trainers." In my mind is a picture of them on the soles of his feet being running shoes, like "we'll be his trainers." But of course it means like personal trainers like you'd get at the gym. The next day, Mr Biff began training. Oh look, there's the picture from the front cover. Woof woof. Oh look, he's going at night. His family helped. Billy Biff took him running. Betty Biff took him skipping. Skipping is so good for fitness. That's reminding me I might take my skipping rope to the park. Get my heart rate up. Salt, mustard, vinegar, pepper. Mrs Biff hid his paper and his slippers. Can you see them? Where they're tucked away. Oh look, she's got them behind her back there, see? Bonzo Biff kept him out of the easy chair. Woof! Are you feeling sorry for Mr Biff here? Or do you think it's worth it? The children also helped to toughen him up. Ow! Mrs Biff helped to toughen him up too. Oh my word. Don't try this at home. Mr Biff was put on a diet. "I'd like 3 cream cakes and a bottle of beer," he said. "You can have 3 carrots and a glass of water," said Mrs Biff. But one day the children said, "How do you feel, Dad?" And Mr Biff said, "I feel as fit as a fiddle." Look, he's rebounded off his very tight ab muscles. And look, her hammer on his head is actually broken. Now it was the day of the fight. A big tent was put up in the town. Everybody was excited. Crowds gathered. Biff v Bop. V versus? I think lots of you say versing nowadays. That is a new word in the English language. No one ever used to say versing when I was young. The referee stepped into the ring. "My lords, ladies and gentlemen," he said. "On my right, Mr Bop." Everybody cheered. "That's my husband," said Mrs Bop. "On my left, Mr Biff." Everybody cheered again. "That's my dad," Billy Biff shouted. There's the Bop family supporting their husband and dad. And, oh, there's all the Biffs wearing their boxing gloves. Okay, here we have the boxing champions. Ready for the big charity match. How is it going to play out? What do you predict is going to happen in this fight? Who do you think is going to win? Do you think Mr Biff has done enough to get himself fit? The timekeeper rang his bell. Ding ding! The fight began. Mr Biff stepped forward. Mr Bop stepped forward. Mr Bop moved to the right. Mr Biff moved to the left. So has anyone actually landed any blows yet? Has anyone actually biffed anyone yet? Suddenly, Mr Bop bopped Mr Biff. At the same time, Mr Biff biffed Mr Bop. They biffed and bopped each other out. Oh my goodness, one huge impact. It's a draw, the referee said. The timekeeper rang his bell. Ding, ding. The fight was ended. 9-10 out. It's a draw. Look at them both after one mighty biff and bop. Completely done for. Do you know about boxing? Do you remember what it's called when they finish their round? Can't miss out these flags on this bunting. Do you recognise any of these flags? Ooh, mopping each other up. In the dressing room, Mr Biff said, "How do you feel?" Oh, always a good question to ask somebody. "I feel terrible," said Mr Bop. "I think bopping people is silly." "Biffing people is silly too," said Mr Biff. Then Mr Bop said, "I feel hungry as well. I've been on a diet." "Me too," said Mr Biff. "Just eat a cream cake now." "And a jam tart," said Mr Bop. "And fish and chips," said Mr Biff. "And roast chicken and potatoes and peas and bread and butter and a bottle of beer," Mr Bop said. Do you think they'll get it? Do you think they'll get a lovely spread now? Have we seen any tasty food so far in the book? Do you remember that page with the eclair on? I think there were some cream cakes there, maybe? Oh, yes. Oh, lovely. So that evening, the two families went out for a big dinner. Mrs Biff made friends with Mrs Bop. Okay, the two wives. That's a nice hat, Mrs Bop. The Biff children made friends with the Bop children. Cheers! Oh look, a bone being smuggled to Bonzo on the floor. And someone checking his muscles. Mr Bop checking his muscles. Say when. Have you noticed adults often pouring a drink say when you think you've had enough? And look at this fantastic spread on here. Is that everything they mentioned? We've got roast chicken and peas and the bottles of beer, chips, fish, a lot of jam tarts, and I guess that's one mighty cream cake. I'm just wondering whose legs these are down here. It doesn't show us anywhere if the Bops have got a dog. Oh, I spoke too soon. There we are. Look, both families have dogs. So back on this page, young Master Bop must have been handing a bone to his own dog, who then chose to share it. Bonzo Biff shared a bone with the Bop dog, and a happy time was had by all. The end. Okay, what new words did you notice there? I think for me, the main new words were actually on the cover. We had rivals. Do you remember? Can you spell it? Rivals. Remember, they were the people who you're competing against, who you're trying to both, let's have them being rivals, doing a times table square in maths. Okay, they're rivals and they're sort of a bit looking at what each other are doing, and they're both wanting to come first. Okay, so they're rivals. They're kind of in a competition. Okay, we're talking about sport. Who's going to be the winner on the podium? And then they're rivals. Maybe one of them is going to come gold, one of them is going to come silver. Or you might say that Rafa Nadal at Wimbledon playing his tennis, his main rival might be Djokovic or Pete Sampras. They're the kind of people who might beat them. Okay, so the rivals. There's 3 mountains in Wales where I love to go walking, and they're called Eiffel, which it makes me always think of the 3 rivals, and you can imagine that they're kind of having a competition with each other to see maybe which one's the highest. So rivals, it's a bit like, if you're trying to remember how to spell it, arrivals, maybe, which one's going to arrive first? Just rub off the first 2 letters. Arrivals becomes just rivals. Who's going to win? Okay, the other new word on the back was fit and lean. So this isn't like lean the verb when you lean over. This is lean as in the adjective describing him. Lean makes me think of a fox after the winter that's not had much to eat. You can say it's had, you can say it's had a lean time actually. There's been lean pickings over the winter, and he's all a bit skinny, and you can kind of see his bones through his fur. Not like manky, like a really scruffy. He's just kind of lean and hungry and ready to go out and hunt some food. Okay, so we've got rivals and we've got lean. Now the other word you might have noticed a lot was toughen. Toughen. Do you remember Mr Biff's children were trying to toughen him up? And do you see that sound is made by that GH there? So it sounds like you might say it toughen, toughen him up, okay? But instead of this F, it's the GH making a sound. When I was little and I was going to the seaside, and I knew I was going to go on the beach and wade into the sea and paddle with bare feet, and if there might be stones on the beach, I would always try and toughen up my feet before I went, maybe by walking around in my garden with bare feet to try and make my soles of my feet, the skin underneath, just that bit tougher, so I didn't get sore feet when I tried to walk into the sea. It kind of means like a bit stronger and a bit harder. See if you can use toughen, lean and rivals in a sentence in the comments, and I hope you have a really good week and see you next time. Bye.